Welcome, everyone. I am Erin Thompson, the faculty director of the John Jay Center for Gender Justice, and we are extremely excited to have Marcos Gonsalez return to campus, even if virtually. He is a literature professor now and the author of Pedro's Theory, a memoir which has been praised by all very deservedly. If you have not read it, you should check it out. And he is here to lead this section about mapping your life. So please take it away, Marcos.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for inviting me, for being back at John Jay. I'm excited to be back and to talk with all of you and to present some ideas about what I have around mapping your life. And that is what we're going to talk about. So let me first bring up a nice fun PowerPoint. So this will be the kind of touchstone. It'll help guide me, help guide you. And so for those of you who are here at this present hour, I welcome you to provide ideas, feedback. I'm going to be giving prompts and different kind of tips and guidance for figuring out how to write about your life in the ways I'm going to talk about it. So you are free to participate, to engage. I welcome it. For those of you who may be watching later at or a different time, this presentation will be also available to you in a way that you can go through it slowly, listening to everything you need to listen to. So it's both for you, for those of you that are here, and for those of you who may come later. And those of you here, you can totally look at this later. So I'll be doing some talking, and I'll be giving you prompts, asking some questions maybe. So today, again, I'm going to be discussing ways about writing about your life and thinking about your life and theorizing about your life in a way that is connected to a kind of social, cultural, political realm too. And so let me just go into a little bit on myself first to get a better understanding of where I come at with this from. My name is Marcos Gonsalez, right? I'm an essayist. My book, Pedro's Theory, just came out this past January. And the book is about essentially, right, my experience growing up as a queer Mexican, Puerto Rican kid in small town, rural United States. It was predominantly white, very straight, and all those levels. So the the book was about about kind of exploring the thoughts that I believed about myself as a person and going through experiences of homophobia, of fat phobia, of racism. And basically the book is about trying to examine what happened there as a kid, right? And what was happening to me, and essentially about my coming of age and moving from small town New Jersey to New York City as a college student, and then from New York City to just kind of thinking about my movement across the United States, across the Americas, my journey to Mexico, right, to where my dad is from. And right, the book thought about my identity and who I was through actually geography and cartography and locations and space. And so I was able to understand myself better and understand the story I wanted to tell others, right, through thinking about myself in the language of cartography, of geography, of like maps. And it also helped me explore, right, being a person who is Puerto Rican, who is Mexican, and seeing how that island and that country that is Mexico, how they shaped who I am today and how they shaped the possibilities for my life. So with that being said, I wanted to really think through ways of helping others tell their stories, and thinking of how they can do it in this way that speaks to spaces and speaks to identities and speaks to locations, right, that we grow up in and the places that we come from. So that is why today, right, the presentation called Mapping Your Life, I think is so important and why I hope it might be important to you. So, what does it mean, right, to map out your life in any particular way? So, ultimately, right, it's about thinking about autobiography about one's life as a map making practice. So, I want us to really stick with this idea of map making, right? The both as a metaphor and as just a general way of like constructing a map. And so, I'm going to keep using the language and the terms of maps and map making. Um, and they're going to be really important and crucial to understanding the different writing tips and guidance and uh, uh, prompts I'm going to give you too, right? And so when you think about maps, right, maps are literally about how to get from point A to point B to point C, point D. It's about the journey. It's about being guided, right? So you have someone who goes to maps to be guided through a journey, and then you are going to be the map maker today, right? You are the person who will construct a map. You are the person who is going to guide someone from point A to point B to point C as a kind of journey. So the map making as a practice and as a metaphor is really pertinent here, right? So because maps are about making connections and flows and networks between places for understanding. And essentially, this idea of map making as a way of writing about your life um, is about also combining, right, the personal, the autobiographical, with history and cultural analysis, right? It's to say that when you have a map, right, a map is broad and it's wide and it's capacious, and I want you to think about your life that way, right? In a way of how can we talk about your life and narrate your life in a way that speaks to, right, um, the identities and the cultures and the backgrounds that you come from and that you are, right? And those inevitably will speak to different parts of the social, the historical, in the political. And I don't want you to only think of this as only a writing project per se, right? Or that telling the story of your life or a story of your life can only happen in the writing form, right? That's not true. It can also happen in many other forms. So all of you who are watching, right, I want you to think of your own disciplines, right? The degrees that you're working on, the kind of careers that you want for yourself, the skill sets that you have. How can you bring them to tell the story of your life, right? So it doesn't have to be in writing. It can be an oral project. It can be a video project. It can be a vlog, right? So there are so many great filmmakers out there. There are poets out there. There are spoken word poets, right? There are so many different ways in which you can um, craft, right, a story of your life. So when I'm speaking today about mapping out your life, I do want you, for all of you who have different ideas about how you want to tell the story of your life, you can do it in different ways. Today we're going to be primarily talking about how to put it into writing, but it's open to interpretation that way. So as I go through the PowerPoint, I've crafted 5 separate parts, right, of how we can think about this map making practice. Um, and they are step by step, right? And you kind of move through them in a gradual way. And we build from step 1, step 2, step 3. So I do want you to know that we are building right from the ground up in this way. But if you can't generate any ideas off the top of your head immediately, that's totally fine, right? Writer's block and being flustered and irritated at not being able to craft up anything um, is exactly what doing this kind of work is about. So I'm going to move step by step through them. I'm going to explain them to you. I'm going to give you prompts for each of them. And if you don't have enough time or it's not satisfying, that's fine. We can just keep going through and figuring it out. So the first one is finding coordinates. The second step is establishing those coordinates. The third is what is the key to your map? Every map has a key. 4 is drawing the map. You have to then do the hard labor of putting together that map. And then 5 is how do you distribute the map, which is about audiences and figuring out who is here to read it. So finding coordinates, step 1. So when you think of a map, right, a map has coordinates. There are quite literally dots on the map detailing different places in the world, different places on that map, um, and they are places, spaces, right, that you go. So at this initial step, we need to just find coordinates, the coordinates of your life. So I want you to start thinking of what are the moments that defined you, shaped you as a person, right? Things that were memorable to you. And I want you to quite literally think of the locations and the dates that they occurred, right? So, for example, if you broke your leg when you were in middle school and that was really important to you, or it totally transformed your life in some way, right? Write down, 2001, broke my leg at blah, blah, blah high school in Bushwick, Brooklyn, right? Um, so we want to know the location, we want to know the dates, we want to know where these coordinates are, because here is where we start to kind of put together the map that is your life, and to be able to start making the pathways and the connections between one point and the next. So you can list them in no particular order, right? I just want you to begin a list. I want you to start thinking of them. And the emphasis, again, is on events that you can explicitly identify as shaping who you are. So that goes into prompt one, um, which this first prompt is after you generate that list, right? A very quick list, you're not going into detail about them. I want you to select one of these coordinates, right? And describe that coordinate. I want you to pick one perhaps from your childhood because it's probably the one that you have the most distance from and that you can think about the most, right? Since it's kind of over. Um, so I want you to describe a coordinate from your childhood that you found to be significant in some way. Why this coordinate? Were you in school, at home, on the street? Was it in your neighborhood? Was it an apartment, a house, an airplane? And I want you to recall with all five of your senses, right? All five of them, the scene. Did you smell popcorn in the air? Did you smell on someone's breath as you passed them by? Did you brush up against something, or something metallic or furry? Was it raining? Was it snowing? Right? This part is just we need to describe the coordinate. We need you to get your sense memories into describing some of these places that were important to you. And so I want you to think of this as what can be an opening scene of some kind, that you can then expand upon in numerous ways, um, because ultimately it will set the ground for the next steps of what we're going to do, right? So for here, you just need to list the coordinates, and then describe one of them, right? Using your five senses, recalling the memories of them in some kind of way. So do I have any of you who are doing this at the moment that might want to perhaps tell some of their coordinates or what they're thinking behind this?
Well, I'm thinking about the time where I had a panic attack when I was young, and that was the first time I've ever experienced that. And I was in school, but I was walking alone in the hallway, and I don't necessarily remember the smell. I think that's hard for me to kind of recall, but I remember like everything about it. It was the walls were blue, like nobody was around. It was quiet, and I was there, and I was having like I couldn't breathe. And like thinking about it now, I like my face gets red and I get heated up because I'm like that was the scariest moment from that time. And I think it's very visible to me when I think about it.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. So, yeah, you said that this happened in middle school, you said, or which school?
It happened, yeah, in middle school.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's good. So we're trying to get the details down, the wall color, the hallway. Was the lighting bright? Was the lighting dim?
It was bright, yeah.
There's another detail, right, to add to your list. It was bright. Um, you said you can't remember the smell, which is fine. Um, It was bright. Were the floors, were they squeaky floors? Were they made of tile? Were they
They
wood?
were tile floors. They were like marble. If you have like, I'm thinking about it, it was marble flooring. Um, it was like a small hallway, and it was weird because it was a small hallway, but like the next hallway was large, and so it's very strange, like recalling that.
So that's good. So write all these down, right? That it was small, that the floors were marble. That's a very specific detail that you want to remember. Um, was there anyone around, or were you alone?
I was alone.
Another important factor, right? So for the next steps, when we talk about it, right, I'm going to ask, were there any other, I want you to think of it like a novel, right? So if it's a character, so you were totally alone. So that's really important to think about and to start thinking about. So alone, right, in this hallway, um, and I'm assuming it was significant because it was a panic attack and perhaps those are still recurring in some fashion.
Hmm.
Yeah, so, right, there's a connection between the past and the present, which isn't exactly what we're going to talk about yet, but those are things I want you to write down and to have them down ready to go. That's good. So any others who have a coordinate they want to talk about? That's fine. If we don't, we can keep going. Maybe you need more time. So that was prompt one. So describing a coordinate. So as Sharon did, right, it's just a matter of getting down the immediate details and the sensory experience and a recalling of what this event was, right? So obviously for Sharon, the event was significant because these are things that keep recurring in Sharon's life. So those are the kinds of connections we're going to start to look at. So the next part, right, after you've described that coordinate and identified a few of them, we need to establish these coordinates, right? So what I mean by that is you need to contextualize these coordinates. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of harder work, um, which is what is fun about the creative process is you just have to keep drafting and figuring things out. So, oh, there's some in the chat. I'm sorry, I didn't see people chatting. Oh, okay, good. I talk a lot. Bye bye, chat. Okay, so I need to go back. Sorry, I went ahead. Let me do that one more time. Okay, we are going back to technology, how it fails me. Okay. No. Here we are. So establishing the coordinates again. So here is step 2 of our process of mapping your life. And this is a twofold process. So I need you to listen carefully so you can do the prompt. So I want you to approach, now that you've described your coordinate, you need to establish it. And so what that means is you need to approach it as if you're writing a novel, right? Or like a movie or something fictional. So think of the kind of techniques and the qualities of a novel, right? A novel has characters, a novel has plot, a novel has scenes and setting. Um, and then at the end of the time, a novel puts them all together into some kind of sequence. So I want you to now think of this coordinate, this that you have just described, and think of it as if you were writing a novel. Who are the main characters at this point? What makes them main characters? Why would they be a main character in this coordinate that you are describing? Who are the secondary characters, right? The people that aren't necessarily as important but are nearby or around. Um, what is the inciting incident that made it significant, right? So we need to know if there was an event that happened in this coordinate at school in 2002, right, or whenever it happened, right? What led up to it? Why was there, to use Sharon's example, why was there a panic attack in the hallway at that specific time in that specific place? Were there certain factors that led up to that moment? Right? So these are the kinds of things we need to think about as you think about your coordinates, about the inciting incident, the characters. What are the stakes, right, behind the coordinates. So what I mean by stakes is every novel, every movie has stakes. We need to care about it. We need to figure out why it matters. So you need to start establishing why this coordinate might matter, right, to not only your story, but to others in some particular way. But for right now, we want to emphasize why it matters to you and why it matters in this specific moment, time, and place. So that's the first half of establishing the coordinate. The next half is right, you want to start kind of overlapping that coordinate with a social, cultural, or a historical or a political context in which it happened. So, what was occurring in the moment they were happening? Who was the president? What were the political situations? So, I'm thinking of something like, if you're in New York City after 9/11, right? Things changed and things were happening, and for better or for worse, right? It is your job as the writer, as the creator, to kind of figure out how those things interweave with what you are writing or what you are proposing to someone. So I want you to think, right, if something happened for you in the year 2010, what was happening in 2010, right? Barack Obama was in his second presidency. Were you not even in the United States and you were in a different country? Um, was it right after the financial crash of 2008? Was it a more local instance of something happening, let's say in New York City? We just got a new mayor or they just changed the law. So you want to kind of start to unpack um, the, the kind of political context that surround your coordinate, right? And you may not have all the answers to that, and that's totally okay. But you want to just start by like, okay, what was happening in 2011 when I wrote this memory or when I have this coordinate here? So you want to start to do that work. And this is the point when we begin to establish between and making connections between the personal and the political, right? So that's the important part here. And what mapping your life is about, right, is making understandings between why and how your life connects to the larger world. So for prompt 2, I want you to narrativize the coordinate. I want you to select the coordinate you have described and now narrativize it. So narrativize is just, again, the fancy word talk about how do you narrate it in some kind of way. So ask yourself questions like, what makes the coordinate significant? And what are the stakes of that significance? Right? So now I want you to really go from not only just describing the scene, but I need you to tell me why this coordinate is significant, right? What are the stakes of the significance? Identify the characters, the setting, and then add in the socio-political dimensions. So for instance, I have an example here. If you were writing on a time you were almost hit by a car on a street, let's say in the borough of the Bronx, what street was it? Was the person drinking and driving? Was the city in need of better lights or traffic safety? And perhaps that's what actually caused the danger for you. Was this part of the Bronx ignored by city officials, which explains why perhaps there wasn't traffic safety? Were you walking home from school with someone or by yourself? So these are the kinds of questions you want to ask that stem from that coordinate, right? So in this case, the coordinate is you almost got hit by a car in the Bronx, right? I gave you location and in 2010, we'll say. So the next set of questions become, okay, what was happening at that time, right? Why is this important to talk about? And so you want to narrate the coordinate for the complexity that it is in some way. And so here's where we will begin to start making connections to actually producing a coherent, unified narrative, right? But for now, I just want you to be able to narrate particular coordinates. You don't have to put them into one big book, into one big essay or a big movie, if that's what you're trying to do. You just first need to begin with narrating coordinates. So does anyone have any ideas behind this one? You don't have to have anything fully fleshed out yet, obviously, because of time constraints. But if you were to narrate one of these coordinates that you have, how would you do it? What would be the undertaking?
Well, I think going back to my thing, um, I was alone, so for me, I didn't have anybody around, like watching me. So it didn't make me feel embarrassed, but it was making me feel scared because I was alone. And there was classes around me, like doors for classes, and it felt scary because what if somebody came out? And so um I know you said think about the political background to it, but I wasn't aware of the political background um at the time. But looking back on it, I can kind of see, because I think it came out of being under a lot of stress, and due to my parents fighting. And I recognize now, like, it was about something political, you know, it was about um, status and etc. So
Yeah.
thinking about it now, it's like, oh, there was a political factor that I haven't even thought of.
Yeah, and that is, I think, exactly right. We have to keep kind of expanding, and it's like when you unroll a carpet, right? And it's like you slowly have to unroll it to make it cover the expanse of the room. Um, and so that's exactly what this work is, right? And so all the answers or figuring all this out will take days, maybe weeks, maybe months, right? Um, but that's good. Thank you, Sharon. I have some ideas too. So you had mentioned just to kind of figure out how we do this process, because the process is basically investigation, right? You have to keep kind of questioning and figuring out what comes next. So you had mentioned, right, you were alone and you didn't feel embarrassed necessarily. So there seems to be some connection, not only just for you, but I think in general, right, of people when you do have panic attacks or some kind of instance where you need either support or you need to feel secure or protected in some kind of way, right? We feel embarrassed, right, in very particular kinds of ways. And so I would even say that in the idea of being embarrassed from a panic attack, that is a political question, because why should we have to feel that way if we are having this kind of experience? So I think right there you already had something to work with of potentially maybe talking about destigmatizing panic attacks, right? Destigmatizing these kind of bodily reactions to stress. Why should we feel stigma around them? We shouldn't have to feel stigma. Um, so I think immediately right there, what I thought of was, you know, you could write a whole piece on destigmatizing panic attacks in some kind of way, thinking about this coordinate. And you also mentioned, right, the stress that could was probably from parents, and then from there, right, I think thinking about the situation of your parents is another avenue of inspection, right? Because as we saw, that's the inciting incident could be the stress from from your family, from school. So we want to, now that we have isolated that coordinate, we want to start expanding. And I want you to think of it like a diagram that's like a web, right? In the middle, you have the coordinate, and then you have like kind of little bubbles that kind of emanate from the big one. I always forget what that is called. Um, so that's good. So right, so the next level of investigation you have to do is about your parents' relationship, right? Or about what was happening there and why it stressed you out the way it did, right? And oftentimes when people are arguing or they fight, there's a lot of pressures on them, right? It might be financial pressures, it might be kind of gendered pressures, right? Or gendered concerns. So those are different kind of avenues you can think about as you think about this and narrating your coordinates, and for all of you really, right? So I want to really emphasize that narrativizing this coordinate is about just keeping up the line of questioning, the interrogation of figuring out all the different aspects that encompass one coordinate. Um, and so when I say the political, I don't mean necessarily, right, like the kind of political context of, you know, who was the governor, but I just kind of mean the social aspects at the time, um, the class aspects, the gendered aspects that all feed into how we understand the political. That's good. So were there any other ideas or comments around narrativizing the coordinate, or maybe any confusions that anyone has, or anything that you need further help with? or follow up too, that works. No, okay, that's good. So we have gone through the first step, right, which is um, finding the coordinate. You had the prompt to describe one of them. This next step was establishing these coordinates, right? And again, going back to our map metaphor, you want to think about the way maps are constructed or designed, the way they look, right? So every coordinate has details about what it is, right? If it's a city, and then you go further, if you think about Google Maps, right? The businesses have their phone numbers, the details of what they are, who owns them, right? So maps tell us so much information. So that is what this part here is. When you do the narration, think of it like Google Maps, right? When you're clicking on a business, you're learning more about it. That's exactly what we're doing here with the coordinate. When you're narrating it, you're giving it details. You're letting someone else know what is here at this point. So next, our third step, you are providing the key for understanding, right? So it's really, now that we have our coordinates, you now have to provide a key. So every map has a key, right? I kind of think this might be more old school. I know when I was in like elementary school, we had to create maps, and the maps you have to make a key. So I put the kind of example of what a key looks like, a map key, at the top right or left for you of the PowerPoint. And right, that key is one where there is a image, a kind of image symbol, and then there's a noun which describes what that symbol is. So that is what you have to do next, right? You have to make a key for your map. And the key is ultimately what will pull together and make someone else understand what it is you're trying to do. So you have coordinates now, right? And you need to set the key. And the key, when we think about it, when we're telling the story of our lives, the key is the themes, the main themes, the main concerns, the main terms, the main topics, objects, motifs that keep recurring throughout the story that you are telling, right? So you want to identify a few recurring themes that can serve as a through line. So essentially, again, you're finding these themes, these different topics of interest, and they become the through line that is what ties together the various coordinates that you would have described, you would have narrated. So, for instance, right, I'm thinking of my own book, and I actually started on step 2, right? I had done these very close narrations of different coordinates in my life, particularly of my childhood, of kind of different places that were in middle school or that were at home in my neighborhood. And I basically just did this kind of deep dive and this deep analysis into these scenes, right? Into these coordinates. And that's where I started off with a book, right? These pages worth of intense close-ups on different coordinates in my past. And from there I was like, okay, what do I do next? I don't know what to do with these. All I have is a bunch of random memories, a bunch of random scenes. What do I do with them? And so then I was like, okay, I need more coordinates, right? I don't know what to do with these. So I basically made more memories, or kind of remembered them, wrote them down. And so then I started with step 2. I went back to step 3. And then it was, or step 1. And then it was only step 3 here when I had to provide a key that I started to see how all the coordinates came together. So for me, one of the keys that I used was the ways in which the different coordinates were challenging masculinity, or our ideas about what it means to be a little boy, what it means to be a queer child. And so until I started noticing what all these different coordinates were trying to do around the idea of masculinity and the theme of, right, challenging masculinity in some way, did I have a better understanding of how all these coordinates spoke to one another. So again, I went from step 2 to step 1 to step 3. So some of these things are interchangeable, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that later. So again, let me give you more examples of how we do this kind of finding the key to your map. So for instance, was not speaking about your family's history prevalent growing up? right, was, so then that would mean silence would be a recurring theme. So thinking about silence as a theme is one of, um, did silence about about your family's past, about your family's traditions, about your background, was that a kind of recurring thing for you in your past, and how has it shaped your present of who you are now? So that is something to, that could be a potential key, right? Quite literally, the idea of silence, and it's a very powerful one, right? Because it's one where we can talk about the silence that perhaps we felt didn't work for us, or hid away past things, and how you kind of are trying to live a life that isn't about silence. It's about being open. That's about being expressive of who you are and of where you come from. So thinking of silence is one. Another one could be a key that is centered around an object, right? So for example, has your mother cooked a particular her dish your whole life, and does the thinking upon the dish produce various memories and stories and events, right? Then this might be a way to thread together some of these coordinates you have. So again, thinking of something like a dish, a favorite meal that your mother would always cook, and that brought back memories, and that there were different kind of events that surrounded it. Um, I was thinking of one for me that was recurring was, my dad always worked with burlap as a child, or still does to this day, because he does field work, and burlap to me became a symbol of my childhood, and it became a way in which I understood my father, and grew to know him better. So I think sometimes objects play a really interesting role of putting together our history, our the personal lives, and also saying something about the general culture we live in. So ultimately, right, it's the goal is to try to fit together the various coordinates into this key. So that's always the goal. So prompt 3, right, is the key to the map. We have to figure it out. So I want you to list a few potential keys that could work for your potential map. Um, what key unites all of these coordinates, right? What will unite it together? And then after you list a few potential keys that you think are that have occurred, then I want you to select one and create an outline of how it fits into the map and the coordinates you have composed. Uh, so I want you to draft up kind of like the one that I was talking about earlier, the graph that is a circle in the middle. It could have the key that is silence, and then it juts out into different avenues. Who were the people in your life that were silent? Who were the ones that were more expressive, right? Or the ones that tried to break through the silence? Did the silence only happen at home, and then somewhere else is where all the beans were spilled all the time? And so this goes back to prompt 2, right? Of of getting the questions answered, of asking those questions. So again, for this prompt, I want you to list a few potential keys that could work for your map, or that could unite all the coordinates together. And then I want you to select one and create an outline of how it fits into the coordinates you have composed, right? And I want you to create a way to see how that might connect. So for those of you who are here right now, are there any potential keys that you can think of that'll help bring together some of the coordinates of your life?
I'm trying to think because I know you brought up the point when I was sharing my story about how embarrassment, like how I didn't feel embarrassed, was important because that could lead to why should I feel stigma, like why should I feel embarrassed about having a panic attack? And then I kind of saw it in the same way when I would cry or show like those type of emotions. Like I've seen it reoccur. Like if I would cry, I would make sure I was alone instead of in front of people so that I wouldn't feel embarrassed. And so I think that's a recurring theme of like not trying to feel embarrassed. And I'm trying to think. You.
Yeah. Yeah, so not to like probe at you, I don't want to do that, but I want you to kind of get a sense of how to do this, and also help all of us kind of how to do this work, right? Because it's hard work. Um, were there other moments in your life that you have had panic attacks that felt equal to this one?
Yeah.
So I think in order to kind of get a grasp at what a potential key might be or could be, is to see where are the other coordinates that in which these panic attacks happen, right? So if it's like when you were a child, do they still occur as an adult, right? Like kind of figuring that out. And so my thing, maybe because you were saying about the embarrassment and like not having to feel embarrassed, what is the immediate, what are your kind of immediate thoughts or reactions after you have one?
Um,
Is it relief? Like, what's the feeling?
I get nervous after, just because I don't know, like, thankfully now I know how to control it a little bit, but it's definitely like me feeling nervous because I'm like, oh my goodness, what if somebody saw, like, if it was in public, I'd be, what if somebody saw, but then in private, it would be, what if it was worse, if nobody was there.
Great. So nervous is an interesting word to use or to think about. But the one that I'm thinking of immediately, right, is about being seen, right? And about what that means to want to be seen and not be seen, right? Because like you said, like you get nervous when you're alone because who knows what might happen. But you're also nervous when you're around people too because of how they might react. Um, so a potential key here, a very tentative one, but it might be right. What does it mean to be seen? For all the messiness, right, that idea has behind it, right? Because you both want to be seen, but you at sometimes you actually don't want to be seen. And I could see like a whole kind of essay, a whole kind of piece centered around the what essentially is a contradiction, right? Because there are these moments in our lives where things happen to us where we want to be seen, right? We want people to recognize we are in pain or we're about to have something happen to us. But then there are other times, right, when you don't want that, right? So I know for me, like it was the other day, I tripped and fell on the sidewalk in New York City, and I was just so embarrassed, and I kept walking, and my ankle, like I twisted my ankle completely, and I was like, I wish someone would like have some sympathy for me, but I don't want to be seen either, right? I don't want to be embarrassed. Um, so I think that's actually a really good way, potentially, Sharon, right, to think about this. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree. You brought up a good point because I haven't even thought about like that, but I do notice that it's kind of like that. Like I want to be, just in case something happens, like I want somebody there, but at the same time, I don't want anybody to see me at that particular stage or anything that could be considered embarrassing. So yeah.
Yes, I think we can work with like like setting up some like potential ones, right? One of them could be embarrassment, to think more about it. Embarrassment though is a very big kind of category to work with. Nervous maybe, but I really like this one of being seen and the idea behind it. um, because it mixes so much in too. So I think that could be one that could really work well as we keep kind of thinking of keys. I know Raphael posted maybe trying to seek help by speaking to someone else in the chat. Maybe trying to seek help by, is this in relation, Raphael, to Sharon's point? Or just a potential key for yourself? Because it was, we're figuring out potential keys. Yes, then select one. Oh, good. Okay, potential key to yourself. Yeah, so you're trying to seek help by speaking to someone. Yeah, so right, if you have several coordinates there about different kind of experiences in your life, um, and maybe it's about you just not reaching out to people or not knowing how to reach out to people in particular ways, that could definitely be a really good specific one, right? That can unite together various kind of coordinates and events and memories together, right? Because oftentimes, right, not knowing how to or not wanting to seek help for things is oftentimes a kind of recurring lifetime thing, right? If you do it when you were a child, you're probably going to do it when you're older too, until you learn how you might want to operate differently. So that's actually a really good one. I like that one a lot. I think it's something we can really do a lot with. Um, but this is probably one of the hardest steps, everyone. So kudos to you for figuring this out. Okay, let's move on to our next prompt, which is step 4. Step 4 is probably the most labor intensive, right? But you have found coordinates, you have described some of them, you have narrated a few of them, and you have also now figured out potential keys that can unite those into one kind of with a through line. So the next and hardest part of any of this work is you have to draw the map, right? You have to begin to connect the dots. You have to color it in, you have to do the hard labor of putting it together. So here's where you bring together coordinates and the key to tell the story of your life or to tell a particular story of your life. So that's the other thing I want to emphasize to you all, right? It's impossible to tell the story of your life, uh, even in a full-length book, right? Like it's something I try to do. It didn't work. I can't tell my whole life. I can't do it all in all those pages. So I think this is something for yourself to think about is you're not telling the full story of your life. You're telling a particular story of your life. So you're telling about not wanting to be seen, right? About telling a story about how you learned how to search for help in others. So that's always something to remember, and I want you all to think about very deeply is, right, you're telling a story, not the full story. That's never the goal. So you want to identify how the coordinates and the key cluster together. Is it around a specific time, perhaps a particular history of your grandfather and you, a cross-generational story of the women in your family, maybe the rise and fall of a romantic relationship, or even your journey as an undergrad, right? That I always find those really compelling, the stories that people write about their experiences as an undergrad. Um, so here's where you do the work of putting everything into a narrative, into one big old narrative. I think for me, when I wrote my book, I had a really tough time with this step, right? I had a really difficult time of figuring out, right, like, how do I tell this story, right? How do I do it? I have a bunch of coordinates. I have the keys. I have several keys, right? One about masculinity, about queerness, about searching for yourself. But I don't yet have a narrative, right? I don't know what exact story I'm telling. And so what I found out as I kept kind of tinkering with it is I was telling a story about coming of age, right? And I did it in a kind of chronological way from me as a child. Part 1 is me as a child. Part 2 is me as a undergraduate student. And then the third part is who I am today. So I decided that that would be the structure of how I'm going to put together my map, right? In order for someone to understand what I'm saying. So I think these are things you all have to think very clearly on of, right, how do my coordinates and my key come together to tell what kind of story are they going to tell? Right? So if we're telling the story of, right, what panic attacks mean to us or what they've done to us, we could maybe tell it, right, how it always happens in public, right? So the structure of your whatever it is you're writing could be about how it's always seemingly in the public, and the public is the kind of narrative, right? These different instances of you in that way. And the some coordinates may no longer fit, and that's okay, right? So as you continue to look at it, you'll be like, maybe this doesn't work, right? This memory when I was 13 or when I was 21, maybe these things don't work. But some may fit together, but you may not know how to connect them, and time will do that for you. So that is really the the tough part here is you need time to figure this out, right? So I don't want you to ever kind of get rid of these coordinates or get rid of memories or different events in your life and say they're not used. They may be, right? You just don't know how to fit them in together. So if you were to take on the using the structure of your journey as an undergrad, right? You're telling a very particular story of your time as an undergraduate student. Let's say um, you always had a hard time paying for tuition, and that is the kind of narrative you're presenting, right, of how you continue to find the ways you hustled and you had to overcome these odds, right? And that's the way you structure it. um, you may be able to fit in memories or past coordinates from your past into there, and some you may not be able to do that because who you are as a person, right, is a mixture of both the present, past, and who you want to be in the future as a future self. So I think those are, when you think about how these coordinates are fitting together or how the keys are fitting together, they may not always fit together. So we need to figure out what is the narrative and how do we draw this map out for a broader way. Are there any ideas for potentially how you would organize and draw your map for those of you who are here? Or what would be like the time frame, or how would you do it? This one is the hard part.
I think it would definitely be from my first panic attack in middle school all the way until I would say last year, just because um it's happened in different parts, and like throughout that that kind of um I guess cycle, that or those years, and so it's all um led back to kind of why I am in college, and why I'm here practically.
That's good. So have you have you found strategies of learning how to live with panic attacks?
Yeah. um and I think it's also helped me like come out of my shell in terms of how I want other people to see me and how I want to present myself.
Great. The way you worded that was beautiful, right? Write that down now. That could be like a in your opening, in an opening statement. That's so good. Um, yeah, so I think right there, right, like you said, like that could be the opening scene, was that very first panic attack you felt, and you kind of described the intensity of it, right, and of what it meant to you and what it symbolized to you. And so then you continue to kind of structure it around that, and maybe a potential narrative, right, or a narrative arc is one of like, right, these panic attacks have been prevalent in my life for a long time until today, and they're still here with me. But right, I have learned strategies of how to live with them, and they've also potentially made me get out of my shell more, right, because I know who I want to be, where I want to be. And that's what led you to where you are today, right? Like you said, how it led you to go to school and to undertake what you want to do. So I think right there's actually a really great structure example for all of us, right? And all of those of you who watch that, thank you, Sharon, for sharing that with us. That's a really good one, right? So it's not about overcoming it necessarily, right? Because you are still living with these things, but it's about telling the story of, right, here are these things that have been that have impacted my life. Here is where they led me to where I am today, and here's how I've learned how to work and deal with it, and how to deal with them. And you can even then present us with more like, like you still have more learning to do, more growing to do, and that's how you end it, however you end what you want to end. So that's exactly what the model, it's a really great model for all of us of what it means to draw out this map, right? Because at the end of the day, a map is about guiding you, right? The map is about guiding a viewer, a reader, from one destination to the next. And that is essentially what a narrative produces. So that is what all of you do, no matter what format you take up, whether it's writing, it's an oral project, it's a movie, right? If you are telling your story, it has to be done in this kind of way. Think about it like a map, right? A map is always about guidance. And that leads me to my final prompt in my final slide, right? About distributing the map, right? So this is a more reflective response, but you have to ask yourself, why does someone need your specific map, right, that you have created for them? That is always a kind of fundamental question you have to ask yourself. Does it help people understand about love, migration, um, survival, compassion, joy, humor, overcoming the odds, systemic issues, right? So this question for me, prompt 5, right? when it comes to the steps, it seems like the last one. But when I was doing this process, drawing the map felt incredibly difficult. I couldn't do it for a long time until I started to ask myself this step of, right, why does someone need my specific map? Why does someone need my specific story that I've created for them? And I had to kind of explain to myself what those reasons were, right? Why did a reader need what I wrote for them? And that actually helped me continue to figure out the keys to this map as well as to drawing it out. So this step is so crucial, right? It's a reflective one. It doesn't require you to do any kind of intense labor. It just requires reflection about figuring out, right? Why do you need someone to read your story, right? Why is it important? And this is important for not just those of you who want to tell your story in some kind of way, whether you do it in writing or otherwise, but right, learning how to tell your story is what is going to be asked of you all the time. When you're on an interview with somebody, right, you have to be able to articulate your story and who you are and what you bring to the table in very compelling ways, right? And so think about how this structure I've given you today can do that kind of work, right? Of if you were on a job interview, how would you give them the map that tells you who you are and why your story and who you are matters? Same thing for interviews. Same thing if you are, let's say you're presenting a new product, you're on a marketing team and you need someone to be persuaded, you could use this model, right, to kind of help you figure that out of how do you tell a story of your life, of this product, of this innovative thing you've done, how do you present it to others, right? And so that is why I think this is really crucial work here. We have 2 minutes left, so that's good. So and then how would you present this again? Essay, oral history, blog. For those of you who are here, any ideas of this question, right? If you were to reflect on why would somebody need your specific story, what would you say what it does for others or how it can help others in some way?
I want to answer how would I present this? I would present it in an essay or like oral history project. I think you can definitely feel a connection when speaking about it to like a group of people because it's something that I feel like a lot of people do go through, and it's very, I don't want to say common, but it also helps people understand that these types of situations can be overcome, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that they can be overcome, exactly. So I think that's good that you have this idea, Sharon. Thank you. So in summary, right, the different approaches were find your coordinates, establish those coordinates. What is the key to the map? Drawing out the map, distributing the map. These are interchangeable, right? So you can go back and forth between them. That's always good. And so it doesn't have to be a kind of linear step-by-step process. Always remember that you do them. If you get frustrated or it's not working, you have writer's block, that's fine. And essentially, right, these are here to just tell a story of your life, not the full story. You can never do that. They're here to tell a particular story, and that's what's important. And then I had some ideas for further reading for all of you. Audre Lorde-Zami, Maxine Hong Kingston, these are all different writers who do this kind of autobiographical writing that's really connected to the world around it and to speaking on larger themes. But we are at time, and I want to recognize that. So thank you, everyone, for coming out. For those of you who watch this later, I hope it is of use to you. And thank you again, John Jay.
And thank you. The worst thing about doing this on Zoom is we can't give you the huge round of applause that you so richly deserve, but know that it is there in our hearts.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all later. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.